Let's go now to Mark Regev, the senior advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. So I just want to go back to the text of the resolution that says it calls for an urgent and extended humanitarian pauses and corridors throughout the Gaza Strip for a sufficient number of days to enable full, rapid, safe and unhindered humanitarian access. Will Israel allow humanitarian pauses and when?
We have already. We've had since this conflict started, we've allowed for humanitarian pauses to allow people to move in humanitarian corridors, to allow supplies to come in. We're talking about pauses for a specific time period in a specific location. We've done that in the past. We'll continue to do that in the future.
So those were in November, weren't they, the last pauses? What about now? When do you think the next one could be?
Well, we already. You're talking you're talking about a cessation of hostilities. That's different from a pause, once again, to facilitate humanitarian movement. If you want a ceasefire, that, from Israel's perspective, can only happen with the release of hostages. As you know, Hamas continues to hold over 100 hostages. There's a chance, because they want that ceasefire, they need that ceasefire, they will agree to the hostages. But had we, to be frank, had we agreed to the UN Secretary General's proposal over a month ago for this unilateral ceasefire, we would never have got the 110 hostages out that we did in November. Hamas isn't going to release hostages because they've suddenly become humanitarians. They do so because they respond to the pressure, and the Israeli Defense Forces are applying that pressure.
The pressure, though, President Biden has described Israel's bombing as indiscriminate. Is Israel now prepared to accept that the tactics need to change within this war to make it less deadly for civilians?
First of all along, we've said that civilians are not the target of our operation. Our enemy is Hamas. And I've sat in meetings with senior American officials where we've actually shown very clearly how the Israeli Defense Forces, how we select a site to be targeted, how we decide on the munitions, we look at collateral damage and try to minimize that, and so forth. There's a very rigorous process of target selection that I think compares well with what you do in Britain and what happens in the United States, other Western armies.
The munitions you're using, though, as I understand it, are mostly unguided. Why are you not using more precision weapons if that's what you say you want to do to minimise civilian casualties?
We use both, but when we use munitions that are less precise, we do that from close launch using dive bomb techniques, so as we can be as precise as is humanly possible in what is ultimately a difficult combat situation. But can I add, these calls from the Secretary General, and we just heard a spokesperson from UNRWA, people who call for an immediate ceasefire, what are they ultimately saying? They're saying Israel has to cease its operation against Hamas, and Hamas stays in power in Gaza. That's the bottom line.
Just on the issue of Gaza, sorry to interrupt
Hamas,
you. Yeah, on the issue of Gaza,
let me finish the point, please.
Yeah, go on.
If Hamas stays in power, that just condemns us all to more bloodshed in the future, because Hamas openly says it does not believe in peace with Israel. It believes in Hamas's words, permanent war. And it's Hamas has said that they would do the October 7th massacre again and again and again.
OK, so on that front, I mean, you're particularly targeting, aren't you, the leaders of Hamas in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Deif, Marwan Issa. Those are, as I understand it, your key targets. What happens if you can't find them? How long will you carry on the operations?
We'll find them. It's only a matter of time. Just as when Osama bin Laden was taken out, that was very important for the United States and for the West, that the leader of Al-Qaeda was neutralized. It's the same with the senior Hamas leadership. These people are responsible for the most atrocious crimes against humanity. You've reported on the BBC about the burning of people alive, the massacres, the machine gunning of innocent civilians at the music concert, the rapes, terrible things. These people must meet justice, and Israel will make that happen.
OK. Now, in the meantime, Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen have been targeting Israeli and other shipping in the Red Sea. Do you expect Israel to launch attacks on the Houthis in Yemen as part of this operation?
So obviously we have the right to do so. But I think at the moment we had meetings last week with Lloyd Austin, the American Secretary of Defense, and we're accepting the Americans say that they have solutions here, and we can be part of that if they want. But ultimately, Israel will not stand by idly and see shipping to our country attacked. Having said that, the Iranians, through their Houthi proxies, have declared war on what is it, 13% of all global shipping. This is important trade route from Asia to Europe. It's not just Israel's problem, it's a global problem, and it must be dealt with. And there has to be diplomatic pressure on Iran to stop this infringement on international trade. And at the same time, we must use military means when necessary.
Mr. Regev, I just want to go back just to the resolution. After it, the US ambassador to the UN, Ms. Thomas Greenfield, said that there was a glimmer of hope among a sea of unimaginable suffering. Would you accept that the suffering in Gaza is, as she described it, unimaginable?
I think there's terrible suffering in Gaza. And I think Gazans are increasingly, and once Hamas's regime has fallen and people can speak freely there in the Gaza Strip, there'll be an incredible outburst of pent-up anger because they know who started this war. They know who torpedoed the ceasefire at the end of November. This is the Hamas terrorists who don't give a hoot for the people of Gaza. Everything is subject to the altar of their crazy extremist agenda. And all this suffering shouldn't have happened. It only happened because on October 7th, Hamas declared war on every Israeli man, woman, and child, and committed the most brutal atrocities, the worst act of terror since 9/11 in the United States, the worst act of anti-Semitic violence since the Holocaust in the Second World War. Did they not know that Israel would respond? Of course they knew. They didn't care about the consequences. Not about killing Jews, not about killing Palestinians.
Mark Regev, thank you for talking to us on BBC. Thank you.